Episode 1: The Forgotten Bicycle on Route 66. The secluded, forgotten stretch of the old Route 66 in Arizona, infamous for strange accidents dating back to the 1940s. Dean, a solo motorcycle rider undertaking a cross-country trip to seek out the nostalgic spots of Route 66. Dean is a lover of old tales. He rides his classic motorcycle down this deserted stretch of highway at dusk. Even in daylight, the road emanates a strange sense of solitude and abandonment. As night fully descends, Dean's headlights illuminate a rusted sign on the roadside, bearing a simple inscription: "Warning, slow down." There is no town, no intersection nearby. Dean decides to stop to take a commemorative photo. As he is setting up his camera, he hears a gentle, almost inaudible clinking sound, like an old bicycle bell. He turns to look down the road. Nothing but darkness and dust. Dean resumes his task, but the clinking sounds again, this time closer. He shines his flashlight into the roadside scrub where the sound originated. He finds something that sends a shiver down his spine. A small child's bicycle, an antique model from the 40s, covered in dust but strangely intact. The bicycle leans against a dried cactus, showing no signs of having been moved for decades. Dean decides to leave. As he prepares to start his motorcycle, he hears a sigh very close by, right behind him. He turns his head. Standing right by the bicycle is a little boy. He wears a faded classic sweater with shorts and high socks. His face is pale and his eyes are wide and fixed on Dean, full of pleading. "Are you lost, son?" Dean asks. The boy doesn't answer. He simply raises his hand forward, pointing at a large, dark stain on the surface of the old asphalt. Dean walks over to it. He touches it with his hand. The surface is rough and dry, but the stain is shaped like a prone body. "What happened here?" Dean whispers. The boy suddenly smiles, but the smile chills Dean to the core. The boy shakes his head, then a small, weak voice speaks, but with terrifying coldness. "You didn't slow down, Dean." Dean instantly freezes in terror. He never told the boy his name. He glances back at the rusted sign. "Warning, slow down." The boy holds out his hand, and in his small palm is a motorcycle key. The exact spare key Dean thought he had misplaced somewhere. As Dean reaches for the key, the boy steps back. His eyes suddenly turn solid black, and his face distorts into an expression of intense agony. Suddenly, everything around Dean vanishes. He is no longer standing on Route 66, but in the middle of a catastrophic accident. Colliding vehicles, shattered glass everywhere, the sound of screaming and sirens. He looks down at his feet and sees he is standing right next to the mangled body of a child, wearing a blue sweater and shorts. The reality returns as quickly as it disappeared. Dean stands trembling by his motorcycle, completely alone. He realizes the boy is the ghost of an accident victim from 1947, hit and killed by a motorcycle. And the curse is not about touching, but about anyone who sees the boy and doesn't slow down to mourn his soul. Just then, Dean's motorcycle automatically roars to life. The headlights blaze. Dean stares in horror as a faint shadow sits on the pillion seat, wrapping its arms around his waist. "Let's go, Dean," the boy's voice hisses. "I know a shortcut to end your journey." Dean tries to turn off the engine, but the handlebars violently turn toward a sheer cliff drop right off the road's edge. The police find Dean's motorcycle the next morning, smashed at the bottom of a deep ravine. Dean is killed instantly. In the accident report files, they find one final photo captured on Dean's camera. A close-up of the rusted "Warning, slow down" sign. However, when the photo is developed, A message has been scrawled onto the sign in red crayon. "Too late, Dean." And a few miles away, the little boy's bicycle still leans against the cactus, its bell faintly clinking in the desert wind, waiting for the next driver who fails to heed the simple warning on the forgotten stretch of Route 66. Episode 2: The Hitchhiker on Resurrection Road. The night had fallen, heavy and silent, engulfing Resurrection Road on the outskirts of Chicago. It was a long stretch of asphalt, winding through desolate fields and frost-covered pine forests, a place where streetlights seemed unwilling to reach. David, a long-haul trucker, was behind the wheel of his massive rig. The truck was his only companion on this nearly 20-hour journey. The digital clock on the dashboard blinked. 2:17 a.m. David was tired, his eyes heavy, and he wished he could get home to his wife as fast as possible. The cab was warm, but outside, the biting December cold was relentless. David was just about to turn on the radio when a faint, blurry figure caught his headlights. He squinted. Under the cold, white light, a young woman was standing close to the shoulder. She wore a thin, white cocktail dress, entirely unsuitable for the weather. Her golden hair hung limp over her shoulders, and she shivered uncontrollably, clutching her bare arms. She looked at David's truck, her eyes pleading. David sighed. He knew stopping might not be safe, but his kind heart wouldn't let him leave a young woman alone on such a desolate, freezing night. He pulled over, the sound of the air brakes hissing, shattering the silence. The truck door opened. The girl timidly climbed into the passenger seat. The distinct scent of dried roses strongly permeated the cabin, overpowering the usual mix of coffee and diesel. "Thank you so much," she whispered, her voice fragile like a gentle breeze. "No problem at all," David replied, pulling his jacket tighter. "What's your name? What are you doing out here at this hour?" "I'm Alara," she replied, avoiding his gaze. "I just left a party. Things went bad." David didn't press for details. He started the engine, feeling an unusual sense of coldness radiating from Alara's side, even with the heater on full blast. She sat quietly, her sad eyes fixed on the window where the darkness and snow blended together. "Where are you headed?" David asked, trying to break the heavy silence. Alara only spoke specific words, slowly and chillingly. "Turn right at the next light. Drive past the cemetery. Stop." They drove for about 10 minutes. As the truck rounded a wide curve, David saw the faint glow of a massive iron gate ahead. "Oh, Jesus," David muttered. "Why here?" In front of them was Holy Cross Cemetery, an ancient burial ground with weather-beaten limestone headstones lying still under a blanket of cold snow. This cemetery had long been infamous for local chilling tales. As the rig came to a stop right in front of the rusty iron gates, Alara suddenly clutched David's arm tightly. "This is it," she said. Her voice now wasn't a weak whisper, but a deep, hollow tone that sent a shiver down David's spine. He turned to look. Alara's face was still beautiful, but ghastly pale, and her eyes, now looking straight at him, held no light or life. An icy freezing sensation washed over David, penetrating his jacket. "But you said you wanted to go home," David stammered. Alara didn't answer. She just stared at him, her lips parting in a faint smile, devoid of joy, devoid of warmth. Then, the unbelievable happened. Alara vanished. She didn't open the door, didn't jump out. She simply dissolved right before David's eyes. The passenger seat was empty. The scent of dried roses lingered, but the frigid air had intensified tenfold. It was as if the thin white dress had never existed. Panic seized David. He slammed the accelerator and sped off, the heavy truck flying down the icy road, leaving the Holy Cross Cemetery gates and the chilling void behind. David drove the rest of the way in sheer terror, not daring to look in his rearview mirror. The next morning, David finally arrived home. He rushed to tell his wife, Sarah, everything. Sarah listened in silence, her face growing increasingly worried. When David finished, she pointed toward the truck. "Honey, why is the passenger seat soaking wet? And that smell of roses. Where have you been?" David looked. The tan leather passenger seat where Alara had sat had a large watermark, but it wasn't rain or dirt. It was a clear, icy puddle, and clearly the scent of dried roses was still intensely present. While inspecting the seat, David suddenly noticed a crumpled piece of old paper tucked under the floor mat. He unfolded it. It was a tattered old newspaper clipping. Tragic accident on Resurrection Road, 1978. Young woman, Alara, 20, killed instantly when her car crashed into the Holy Cross Cemetery gates on New Year's Eve. She was found wearing a white evening gown. David trembled, dropping the paper. He remembered last night. Alara had directed him not to her home, but to the place of her death. She had hitchhiked to return to her own grave. That evening, David tried to calm down. He went to bed early, hoping the nightmare would disappear with the sunrise. Around 2:17 a.m., the exact time he had met the girl, a loud, clear knock echoed from the front door. Sarah shrieked, clutching David. Who is knocking at this hour?" David crawled out of bed, his heart pounding. He peered through the peephole. Outside, under the faint light of the porch, stood Alara. She was still wearing the white dress, her face pale, her eyes vacant. But this time, she said nothing at all. Her hand raised, touching the door frame. In her hand, icy and glistening under the light, was David's truck key fob, which he had been certain he left on the kitchen counter before going to sleep. David and Sarah screamed. They never opened the door. They only watched, horrified, as Alara slowly lowered her arm, offered one final, faint smile, and then vanished into the darkness, leaving the truck key fob lying conspicuously on the cold doorstep. David never dared to drive that road again. He and Sarah moved out immediately, selling the truck. But sometimes, on cold nights, David still wakes up, startled by the faint scent of dried roses in their bedroom, and an unexplainable coldness on his right shoulder, as if an invisible passenger is forever hitchhiking with him on the long road to the shadows. Episode 3. The Growl in the Root Cellar. The desolate, wild Appalachian Mountains, where small, isolated communities thrive, and tales of the wild man or strange creatures are passed down through generations. Liam, a college student seeking solitude by camping alone. Liam had rented an old wooden cabin deep within the thick Appalachian forest. The cabin had a strange feature, an old stone root cellar, the door of which was secured from the outside by a thick oak beam and a rusted chain. The landlord had given Liam strict instructions over the phone. "Son, whatever you hear, whatever it is, you must never unlock that cellar." The first night passed with the buzzing of insects and the rustling of the wind. Liam felt comfortable in the absolute quiet. By the second night, things started to change. Around midnight, Liam heard a strange noise from outside. It wasn't the wind, nor was it a squirrel. It was a sound of rough scraping against the back door of the cabin. Liam jumped up. He looked through the window. Nothing. He told himself it was just a bear or a large stray animal. But then, the scraping stopped, and a deep, low growl, heavy and full of malice, echoed. The sound wasn't coming from the back door, but seemed to emanate from the ground, right beneath the house. Liam realized the noise was coming from the root cellar. Terrified, he circled the house, shining his flashlight into the gap around the cellar door. The oak beam was still there, the chain still tightly locked. This horrified Liam even more. Something was locked in the cellar, and it was trying to get out. On the third night, the growling became more intense, interspersed with loud banging against the stone walls of the cellar. Liam couldn't sleep. He began searching for information about the cabin. In an old notebook left by the owner, he found a note written in shaky handwriting. "It is not a man. It is not a ghost. It is the curse of this forest. It needs to be fed, but it must never see the light. Lock it, lock it, lock it." Liam realized the terrifying truth. Something had been locked in this root cellar for decades, and it survived only on whatever the owners threw down to it. Suddenly, the loud banging stopped. A complete silence fell over the cabin. The silence was more terrifying than any growl before. Liam held his breath, listening. Then a new sound emerged. This time it wasn't a growl, but a small, painful whimpering, almost the cry of a child, echoing up from the kitchen floor. The crying called his name. "Liam, Liam, help me. I'm so cold." Liam's human instinct took over. Could a child have fallen down there? The landlord's warning suddenly seemed inhumane. He grabbed the root cellar key he found in the kitchen cupboard. His hands trembled. He knew he was breaking a terrifying promise, but the pleading cry felt too real. Liam went outside to the back of the house. He shined his flashlight at the cellar door. The crying grew weaker and more desperate. He reached out to unlock the rusted chain. And that was when the crying stopped. As soon as the final lock was undone and the oak beam removed, a horrifying roar erupted. Not the growl of an animal, but the roar of a half-human, half-demon creature that had been imprisoned in darkness for too long. A horrific stench, smelling of putrid decay and swamp mud, blasted into Liam's face. He saw a gaunt, withered arm, skin like tree roots, with long, sharp black claws shoot out of the root cellar opening. It wasn't trying to crawl out. It only needed one thing: Liam. The clawed hand snatched Liam's leg. Liam screamed in horror, struggling and beating the hideous arm with his flashlight. He heard the sound of his clothes and flesh tearing. He never saw what the creature was, but the moment the arm pulled him toward the damp darkness of the cellar, he understood that the landlord had been right. There was no child down there. The crying was just a lure for his human compassion. The security camera, under the fictional premise of the story, only recorded Liam's scream abruptly cut short, followed by the sound of something heavy being dragged. Finally, a loud thud, and the root cellar door slammed shut. When the police arrived a few days later, they found the cabin empty. The root cellar was locked with the chain and oak beam just as before, but this time there were dried blood stains and a few strands of stiff gray hair clinging to the beam and around the lock. The cabin was sealed, and the story of the growl in the root cellar became a new legend, retold whenever someone wandered into the deep Appalachians. Episode 4. The Silent Companion of the Harpers. A modern apartment in Boston, where the serenity of city life is shattered by an antique object from the 19th century. Sarah Harper, a young antique restorer. Owen, her husband, pragmatic and skeptical. The story begins when Sarah Harper acquires an old Victorian porcelain doll at an estate auction. The doll is about 60 centimeters tall, dressed in a faded white lace gown with large, fixed emerald eyes and a slightly unsettling, upturned smirk. Sarah names her Eliza. Sarah believes Eliza is a valuable piece needing restoration. However, as soon as she brings it into their apartment, the atmosphere inside seems to grow heavy. Owen immediately voices his discomfort. "Honey, that doll makes me feel like someone is staring at me." "It's just an antique, darling," Sarah laughed, though she privately admitted that Eliza's eyes always seemed to be following her, no matter which corner of the room she placed it in. The first night, Sarah woke up to a light tapping sound in the living room. She went to check. Eliza was still sitting on the sofa, but the rocking chair opposite it was gently swaying on its own, as if someone had just gotten up from it. Sarah started noticing small, abnormal occurrences. Eliza's face was frequently rotated to face their bedroom, despite Sarah always turning it outwards. Small objects on the coffee table were repeatedly misplaced in confusing ways. Everything escalated in the second week. The neighbor's young daughter, Lily, came over to play. Lily was immediately drawn to Eliza, but then suddenly screamed. "The doll lied!" Lily sobbed. "She told me not to play with my own toys anymore." Sarah and Owen were confused. They comforted Lily, but after the little girl left, Sarah noticed a chilling detail. Eliza's pearl necklace, which Sarah had removed during restoration, was now back around her neck. Sarah was certain she had locked it away in her toolkit. That night, Owen decided to run an experiment. He laid a thin layer of baking flour around the base of Eliza's chair and went to sleep. Around 3 a.m., they woke up to a loud noise in the living room. They flicked on the lights. Eliza was sitting perfectly still on the sofa, but on the thin layer of flour there were tiny footprints, not human or cat prints, but small doll shoe prints, leading from the sofa to their bedroom door and back again. Owen was genuinely terrified. He quickly took a picture with his phone. When he looked at the photo, he discovered something more horrific than the footprints. Eliza's face in the photo was no longer the fixed porcelain expression. Its lips were stretched into a wide, ear-to-ear grin, and its emerald eyes seemed to be staring directly into Owen's phone lens. They decided to get rid of the doll. They carefully wrapped it up and drove it to a remote city dump the next morning. They sighed with relief. Life returned to normal for about 2 days. On the third night after disposal, Sarah and Owen were asleep when a knock echoed, not at the front door, but at their bedroom window on the 15th floor of the apartment building. They both shot up. They looked out the glass window. Outside, there was no balcony, no ledge to stand on. And right then, the knocking came again, this time accompanied by another sound, the high-pitched, giggling laugh of a child. They slowly turned back to look inside the room, placed neatly and squarely on Sarah's pillow, as if it were a gift, was Eliza. The doll showed no signs of dust or the dump. It was perfectly clean, and its blue eyes seemed to wink at Sarah. Sarah and Owen fled the apartment immediately, taking nothing with them. They called the police, but no one believed the story of the self-moving doll. A few weeks later, new tenants moved into their apartment. On their first night, they found an old porcelain doll on the pillow. They laughed, saying, "The previous owner must have forgotten it." The new tenant placed the Eliza doll on the living room sofa. The next morning, they found the doll sitting on the dining table, holding a small kitchen knife. Taped to the doll's back was a piece of paper written in an old-fashioned script. "Don't try to discard me again. I am this family's companion." And so the Harpers and the new tenants realized that Eliza was not merely haunted. It was the spirit of the house itself, and it would forever remain there as the silent companion who would never leave anyone living within its walls. Episode 5. The Curse of the Dark Ward. Penhurst State Asylum, fictional name, a massive, long-abandoned facility in Pennsylvania notorious for its brutal experiments and patient neglect. Jake, a thrill-seeking urban explorer, urbex photographer, constantly searching for the most disturbing photos. Jake breaks into Penhurst Asylum on a stormy night. The place is a maze of long, dark hallways, peeling paint, and a thick, overpowering smell of mildew. His target is the Dark Ward, the segregated area that once housed the unredeemable patients and was the site of numerous mysterious deaths. Jake turns on his camera and ventures deep inside. The silence here is not peace, but a heavy, compressed quiet, as if every scream and groan has been swallowed by the old walls. Upon reaching the Dark Ward, Jake has to use a crowbar to pry open the rusted metal door. Inside is a narrow corridor with small cells, devoid of light and air. The walls are still covered with deep scratch marks and strange writings drawn in dried blood. Jake begins taking photos. As he aims his lens at one cell, the flash goes off, and he clearly sees a gray, blurred shadow standing in the corner. Jake is shaken, but because the photo is perfect, he decides to stay. He proceeds down the corridor. As he passes the last cell, Jake hears a very faint, whimpering cry, like a woman sobbing quietly. "Hey, I'm not here to hurt you," Jake whispers, trying to reassure himself. He turns to leave, but instantly, the sobbing turns into high-pitched giggling, echoing and utterly insane right behind him. Jake panics and runs. He sprints down the dark hallway, but he realizes that his footsteps are no longer the only ones he hears. He hears the shuffling sound of slippers rapidly chasing him from behind. He dives into the old nurse's station, slamming the heavy door shut. He gasps for air. In this room, there is an old gurney covered in a thick layer of dust. On a nearby desk, a patient file is lying open. Jake uses his phone light to read. The file documents Eleanor Vance, a patient confined to the Dark Ward for paranoia, who died in her cell from malnutrition and neglect in 1957. The chilling final line is written in red ink. She said she would never leave this place, and she needs friends. As Jake finishes reading, he feels a cold breath on the back of his neck. The smell of mildew in the room suddenly gives way to a sharp antiseptic odor and the scent of fresh blood. The old gurney begins to rattle softly. Jake spins around. He sees no one, but right on the surface of the gurney, a dark red, wet stain is slowly appearing, forming the silhouette of a woman lying on her back with her hands outstretched. In blind panic, Jake lunges for the door, but the door is locked from the outside. He pounds on the door, screaming. He hears Eleanor's insane laughter echoing from the hallway, accompanied by the tapping of long fingernails on the metal door. "Don't go, Jake," a dry, hissing voice whispers right into his ear. "We'll stay here forever. You're going to be my new companion." Jake looks into the cracked window pane. In the faint reflection, he sees a disheveled, white-gowned ghost clutching his back from behind. Jake's camera is abandoned in the nurse's station. The final footage records the gurney shaking and Jake's desperate pounding on the door. Then, a piercing scream is suddenly cut off, followed by the sound of something heavy being dragged out of the room. The final minute of the tape records only audio. The metal door slams shut with a thud, and Eleanor's prolonged, chilling giggle echoes into the silence of the abandoned asylum. When paranormal investigators later find the camera, they find no trace of Jake. However, on the old gurney in the nurse's station, they discover a broken camera body with undeveloped film, and right there on the gurney, there is a new message, written in a reddish fluid, repeating a single sentence. He is mine. 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 Episode 6. The Echoes of Tunnel 9. Deep beneath Manhattan, New York, in abandoned subway tunnels, the site of a devastating derailment accident in the 1950s. Marcus, a veteran subway track worker who always works the late-night shift. Marcus is a pragmatic man. After 20 years working deep beneath New York City, he has heard every urban legend about dead souls and strange creatures. His job is to inspect and repair tracks in tunnels that are shut down after midnight when the line is temporarily closed. Tonight, Marcus's team is assigned to inspect Tunnel 9, an old stretch of track taken out of service after a horrific derailment in 1956 that claimed dozens of lives. The area is cold and sealed off. Marcus and his young assistant, Ben, walk into the tunnel, equipped only with headlamps and walkie-talkies. The air is heavy with the smell of dust, grease, and an indescribable metallic rust. Initially, everything is normal, save for the faint sound of the water pump dripping. As they proceed deep into the heart of Tunnel 9, Marcus starts to hear a subtle noise. "Did you hear that, Ben?" "Hear what, Marcus?" Ben asks, sounding tense. Marcus listens in silence. It's a faint moan, mixed with the soft clanging of metal, as if someone is trying to drag a severely injured body. Marcus recognizes the sound. It is the sound of a person trapped beneath a train wheel. "It's just acoustics, Ben," Marcus mutters, trying to reassure himself. The tracks play tricks on the sound, but as they continue, the moaning becomes clearer and more desperate. It seems to be following them closely. Suddenly, Ben's headlamp begins to flicker wildly, then goes out completely. "Damn it!" Ben exclaims. Right then, a blood-curdling scream erupts from a woman, not from a distance, but right beside them, shaking the entire tunnel. The scream is abruptly cut off by the terrifying screech of train brakes, even though no train is running. Marcus grabs his walkie-talkie. "Control, is anything running in Tunnel 9? A static-filled voice responds. "Negative, Marcus. That line is closed. You guys are the only ones down there. Everything is silent." As the voice dies out, Marcus's own headlamp begins to flicker. The intermittent light flashes onto the tunnel wall. In a brief moment of light, Marcus sees a sight that chills him to the bone. On the wall, exactly where the headlamp pointed, is a large, dark handprint, not made of dust, but of grease or dried blood, positioned too high for an ordinary person to reach. And when the light dies completely, the moaning is gone. Instead, there is a steady clack-clack sound. "What is that?" Ben whispers, trembling. Marcus stammers. "That's a crutch." The clack-clack is the sound of a wooden leg or a crutch tapping rhythmically on the ballast, but it's the sound of a crippled person struggling to walk. It's the distinctive sound that rescue workers described after the 1956 accident, the sound of one survivor who had lost both his legs. They turn on their phone lights, trying to run. As they turn their backs, they see it. In the weak phone light, less than 30 feet away, a tall, dark figure is standing. It is not a misty ghost, but an ink-black entity with glowing red eyes like embers. It has no legs, moving instead by using two wooden crutches pounding the tracks, creating that terrifying clack-clack. It raises one arm. The other hand grips a large railroad hammer. It moves slowly, but it is definitely closing the distance. Marcus and Ben run for their lives. Marcus never looks back, but he hears the rhythmic clack-clack of the crutches, growing closer and closer, along with a deep, echoing, guttural laugh through the tunnel maze. Marcus and Ben burst out of Tunnel 9, frantic and exhausted. They never work the night shift again. A few weeks later, their replacement crew enters Tunnel 9. A week after that, Control receives a walkie-talkie signal from the tunnel at 3 a.m. We hear noise. We hear someone moaning. Someone is injured down here. Then, a series of screams from the whole crew. After that, only silence. The next morning, the recovery team finds the crew's equipment abandoned. In a dark corner, they find an old wooden crutch covered in dust and grease. And on the crutch, there is a single strand of Marcus's gray hair and a small taped note written in a shaky scrawl. "Where did you all go? I'm waiting for you down here." Episode 7. Gold and Gore in Body. A famous haunted mining town in California, abandoned after the gold rush ended. The town is known for a curse that dictates anyone who removes an object must pay with misfortune or death. Chloe, an amateur antique collector determined to find a small souvenir from Bodie. Chloe drives to Bodie in the late afternoon, ignoring the warning signs and barriers. The town is strangely intact, as if its residents only left yesterday. The air is cold and eerily still, but Chloe senses an invisible tension. She believes the curse is just superstition. Her goal is to find a small item, maybe an old coin or a rusty nail, to take home as a keepsake. Chloe enters the Killer's Inn, a building rumored to be the site of a deadly massacre during the gold rush era. As she walks past the old bar, she spots a small gold pocket watch jammed beneath a loose floorboard. Feeling like she has struck gold, Chloe uses her small utility knife to pry the watch free. The moment she takes hold of the cold timepiece, an instant chill races down her spine. Stepping out of the saloon, Chloe feels the atmosphere shift. The sunlight abruptly vanishes, and an unnatural thick fog envelops the town. Despite the clear sky just moments before, she begins to hear auditory hallucinations from all directions. Brief screams from the saloon, the panic of horses neighing, and the distant sound of gunshots. These are the sounds of a town living its final moments in utter chaos. Chloe rushes back toward her car. As she crosses the main street, she hears a hoarse, pleading voice behind her. "Give it back! Give it back to me!" Chloe turns around. She sees a faint shadow of a man in a tattered 19th century suit, standing in the doorway of the saloon. He isn't advancing, merely raising his thin arm toward her, begging. Terrified, Chloe clutches the watch tighter. As she touches her car door, a loud crash echoes. One of the windows of the nearby church shatters spontaneously into 1,000 pieces, as if an invisible force just punched through it. The watch in Chloe's hand suddenly becomes burning hot, searing her skin. She looks down. The crystal face is cracked, and dark blood-like trails are weeping from inside the metal casing. Chloe decides to throw it away, but when she opens her palm, the watch has vanished. In its place on her palm is a circular burn mark, exactly the size of the watch. Immediately, Chloe's car fails to start. The headlights flash erratically, and the radio automatically blasts painful white noise. In the flickering light of the headlamps, Chloe sees dark shadows converging on her car. Not just one, but dozens of figures in old attire, their faces obscured in the fog, all pointing accusingly at her. And then, an icy, almost glacial voice whispers right into her ear, without the window even opening. "The Bodhi curse has been triggered. You took my gold. I will take your Soul. Chloe's hair is violently pulled back. She feels an invisible pressure clamp down on her throat, making it impossible to breathe. The next morning, a park ranger finds Chloe's car stalled on the outskirts of Bodie. Inside, there is no one. The car doors are locked from the inside. The gold watch is never found. However, on the dust-caked windshield, a single tracing is drawn with a finger, depicting a crude grave with a pocket watch drawn right above it. Weeks later, Chloe's hospital records are discovered. She is not dead, but she is found at a gas station hundreds of miles from Bodie, suffering from complete memory loss and crippling photophobia, fear of bright light. She constantly clutches her right hand, where the watch-shaped burn mark is, and occasionally she moans and asks, "What time is it?" She paid the Bodie curse with her sanity and her time. Episode 8: The Harvester's Circle. A secluded and forgotten forest in Oregon, rumored to be the center of ancient cult rituals. Mark and Lisa, a young couple seeking the perfect campsite, completely isolated from the outside world. Mark and Lisa drive deep into the Siuslaw National Forest in Oregon, following the directions on an old camping map. The dirt road narrows, cell service vanishes, and there is no sign of any other campers. Finally, they find a perfect clearing next to a small stream. While setting up their tent, Lisa notices something strange. Around the edge of the clearing, the trees seem to stop growing. The area formed a large, bare circle, and there was an unsettling lack of bird song. Mark dismisses it, suggesting it must have been an old wildfire. The first night, they sleep peacefully. On the second night, around 2 a.m., Lisa wakes up to a strange humming sound. It wasn't music, but a low, rhythmic chanting, as if emanating from the throats of dozens of people. Mark wakes up too, his face pale. The sound is coming from deep within the woods, but it seems to be getting closer. They turn off their flashlights and hold their breath, listening. The chanting, in an unidentifiable language, continues, accompanied by the gentle tapping of wooden objects. Then, the chanting stops. A blood-curdling shriek from an animal, perhaps a deer or wolf, rings out, then is abruptly cut short. This is followed by quiet, chilling cheering and the sound of slow footsteps surrounding their campsite. Mark and Lisa peek through the tent zipper. They dare not speak. Outside, in the faint moonlight, 4 tall figures are circling their tent. These individuals are wearing long, dark robes with hoods pulled low over their faces. They say nothing, moving slowly, holding large, curved scythes in their hands. As one of the figures walks past, Lisa notices a horrifying detail. The man's robe is soaked with a dark, thick liquid, and he is treading in fresh blood scattered on the ground. Suddenly, Mark knocks over his water bottle. The small noise echoes like a gunshot in the silence of the night forest. The cloaked figures stop. All of them turn their heads toward the tent. A rough, deep voice comes from the lead figure. "We have intruders." The harvester does not welcome intruders. One of the robed men slowly kneels down, uses his finger to smear blood on the ground, and begins to draw an eerie circle around the tent. Mark and Lisa know they have to run. They tear open the back zipper of the tent and crawl out, attempting to escape into the woods in the opposite direction from the robed figures. They run non-stop, but they hear the sound of bare feet and the scythes scraping together close behind them. When Mark turns back for a glance, he sees one of the figures has removed his hood. His face is eyeless, just dark sockets, and his mouth is stretched wide in a toothless grin, revealing only sharp, pointed gums. Lisa slips and falls. Mark tries to pull her up, but it is too late. He hears a deafening swoosh sound, and Lisa screams in agony. Mark manages to escape, injured and hysterical, and is found by the police the next morning. He cannot speak clearly, only repeating the word, circle. The police search the campsite area. They find the shredded tent, but no trace of Lisa. Instead, they find the perfect clearing. In the center, on a large stone slab, they find Lisa's engagement ring, placed neatly. Around the slab, fresh blood has been used to draw a perfect circle. And inside the circle is a strange symbol, resembling a double scythe. The next day, the pine trees surrounding that specific campsite withered and died inexplicably. The curse of the forest had been renewed, and the harvesters had found a new member for their next ritual. Tuyệt vời! Tôi sẽ chuyển ngữ kịch bản tập 10 sang tiếng Anh Mỹ, tập trung vào yếu tố kinh dị đường trường, road horror, sự cô đơn trên Route 66 và nỗi sợ hãi về một hồn ma trẻ con thù hận.